Yes, so today's topic of discussion is artificial pollination. So artificial pollination is the pollination when human interfere in the process of pollination. So there are many steps of artificial pollination. So basically why artificial pollination is used, it is used to hybrid the plants. It is used to mix the characteristic of two plants. Suppose I have two variety of plant. One is having good yield and other is disease resistance. So I want both the characteristic in one generation which is good in yield and uh, disease resistant. So for that I will select the plants. I will select a male plant and then I will select a female plant. So the very first step of artificial pollination is selection. Then afterward, emasculation. What is emasculation? Emasculation is the process of removal of stamen. So the plant which is chosen as female plant, from that plant we need to remove the stamen. So there should not be any chance of self pollination or self fertilization. So to stop self pollination, we have to remove the stamen from the chosen female plant. Then next step is bagging. So in this step we have to cover the female plant. Why we need to cover the female plant? So to avoid any unwanted cross pollination. So before uh, before artificial pollination done by the pollinator, if some natural cross pollination occurs, then it can uh, destroy the purpose. So to avoid any chances of cross pollination, unwanted cross pollination, we need to cover the plant, female plant. The next is collection of pollen grain. Then once the pollen grain of the desired male plant is matured, we can collect these pollen grain with the help of brush and petri dish. Then brushing the selected pollen grains on selected stigma. Then once the pollen grain are selected, these pollen grain can be sprinkled on the surface of selected female plant and then cover it again. Why we need to cover the gynoecium again? So that again to avoid any cross pollination. So these are the steps of artificial pollination: selection of the male and female plant, then removal of the stamen from the chosen female plant, then covering the gynoecium to avoid unwanted cross pollination, then collecting the pollen grains from the chosen male plant, then brushing the selected pollen grains on the selected stigma, and then cover the gynoecium again. So this process in which human artificially pollinate uh, the plant, this process is known as artificial pollination. Is it clear all of you? Any confusion in this? So next is pollen pistil interaction. What is pollen pistil interaction? Once the pollen grain reaches to the stigma of the gynoecium, so pollen grain and pistil interact each other. See, if apple pollen grain lands on the surface of mango's stigma, it is not going to germinate over there. Apple's pollen is not going to germinate on the stigma of mango uh, gynoecium. Okay, why? Because both are not compatible. Very first thing. So same is only when species pollen grain reaches on the surface of the same species stigma, then only that pollen grain germinate, and this process is known as pollen pistil interaction. So pollen pistil interaction is a dynamic process of pollen recognition followed by promotion or inhibition of the pollen. What is promotion or inhibition? If the pollen grain is recognized by the pistil, then it will be promoted to germinate on the surface of pistil, and if it is not recognized by the pistil, then it will be inhibited. Okay, so This process is known as pollen-pistil interaction, and chemical component of pollen interact with those of pistil. So how this pollen-pistil interaction take place? So chemical component of pollen grain interact with the chemical component of pistil. Okay, got it. So there are the steps. These are the steps of pollen-pistil interaction. So very first step is pollination of obviously. So pollination will occur. Pollen will transfer from the anther to the stigma of the female flower. Okay. Then pollen adhesion. Once the pollen is reaches toward to the stigma, it will adhere on the surface of stigma. So the second step is pollen adhesion. Third is step is pollen hydration. So why pollen hydration is needed? See, pollen grains are very much dehydrated. Why they are very much dehydrated? Because they need to restrict themselves from getting germinate before reaching on the stigma. So they are very much dehydrated. So once they reach to the surface of a stigma, they absorb water and then start germinating pollen tube. So this process is known as pollen hydration. Once they hydrate themselves, they start germinating. So what is germination? Starting of pollen tube. So pollen tube start coming out of the pollen grain. This process is known as pollen germination. So once the pollen tube start forming, so that pollen tube will enter into the stigma. Okay. Then next step, that pollen tube will grow throughout the style. What you don't know, Bhavya? Bhavya, you want to ask something? Hmm. So once the pollen tube will enter into the stigma, the pollen tube will grow through the style, and it will reach to the ovule and embryo sac, and then double fertilization occurs. So this whole process is known as pollen pistil interaction.